The Adeptus Custodes are the bodyguards of the Emperor of Mankind, but they are so much more. There are no finer or more fearsome warriors within the Imperium. They are to a Space Marine what a Space Marine is to a Guardsman. Demigods clad in armour of golden auramite, they wield the Imperium's deadliest and most finely crafted weapons. After their master was struck down during the Horus Heresy, they took to wearing shrouds of mourning black as a symbol of their disgrace, a somber reminder that they would not shed for many millennia. For 10,000 years, they have guarded the Sol System with ironclad determination and fight secret wars of which the wider Imperium can never know. But now, with the Imperium spilling through the bounds of reality and war consuming every Imperial world, the Custodians don their red garments once again and strike out into the stars to eliminate terrible dangers before they can come anywhere near the throne-bound Emperor.
Back in 2000, it was the 3rd edition of Warhammer that was out, and the 3rd edition rulebook had all of this crazy artwork in it from what's his face? He does all this like the crazy early stuff. I can't remember his name.
John Blanche.
John Blanche. Yes, not Alan Blythe, this is a person. John Blanche. It had all his artwork, and one of the pieces of artwork there is 2 custodians. I think both with axes, and they're standing in front of this giant ziggurat behind them, which you assume to be the Imperial Palace, and that picture fascinated me because the 2 custodians standing there don't look like anything else, at all. They don't look like Space Marines, they don't look like Guardsmen, they don't look like anything. And so I was always attracted to those 2, and I was just like, who the hell are they? They're super cool. And so later, I found out who they were. They're custodians, like this is what they do. And I was like, oh, that's actually really fascinating. And I really empathize with a lot of the things they do in the lore, because they are
killing space.
Everything they do. Well, yeah, there's that. Everything they do, they try and do to like perfection, essentially. And then through the Horus Heresy, you read more about them, and you're like, holy crap, these guys are amazing.
A Space Marine is created by the introduction of gene seed to the body, as well as the implantation of supporting organs. Between them, these modifications reshape those who would receive them into living weapons. However, the transformation to create a custodian is entirely different and takes place at a deeper level. It takes root in the cells, perhaps even the soul of the aspirant. The Emperor himself put it best. Each one of the 10,000 represents genetic lore acquired over many lifetimes. Each one of you is unique, a work of art never to be repeated. I am miserly with your lives when I spend so many others without a thought. I would not order the 10,000 into the fire if there was another way.
It's really cool, and you're certainly not alone in your love of the Custodes, because very famously the Emperor loves them greatly, it seems, compared to Primarchs, and how he talks to them. And there's these scenes where in the books where he's like sat down with them and they're like having a little huddle, and he like you say, they have kind of different roles. And unlike the Space Marines, and a big part of Horus's fall is like, what happens to the Space Marines after the Great Crusade is over? What happens to my sons? And the Custodians don't really have that, because they're like the best anyone can ever do. It's kind of like the extent of transhuman technology, but also like the Emperor kind of talks to them about philosophy and politics and how to kind of handle all these things. So they will always have a place in the Emperor's Imperium. So it's really interesting. And he talks about how, just to kind of double down on your point there about them being unique, like it's said in the lore that each one of them is so separate. It's like teams of scientists for generations develop a custodian, and then that technology is never used again. And he uses their lives incredibly sparingly, because they are kind of peak of human ingenuity as well. And they are. It's a fascinating start for a faction.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, the thing that people forget, I think, about the Emperor is that he is immortal. And so he is about 50,000 years old.
Yeah, I think in the more recent novels he talks about he sees people writing on caves. So I think it pretty much confirmed. Yeah.
So it's older than that. Yeah. But he is so old that...
It sounds like a your mama joke.
If we think about... I know,
your
right?
Emperor's
He's
so
old. But this is the thing. Like, think about us. Think about how we make friends.
Oh, God.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
yeah.
So, like, we make friends based on mutual experience,
Warhammer.
shared interests, proximity, geography. Yeah, like Warhammer. Like, we have this. Yeah, we have this shared interest, and like we've grown up with all the same like cartoons, and we have sort of the shared cultural identity. And that's why if you're friends with someone who's a lot younger or a lot older, those generational differences, like you notice.
Yeah.
And so imagine that, but you're over 50,000 years old. You don't have anyone who can relate to you on your level, because there is no one on your level. There is no one with your level of shared experience. So the Emperor, in creating the Custodian, basically made himself a bunch of friends. All the other immortals kind of don't hang out with him anymore. So he made himself some friends to like help him. Like that's why he cares about them so much, because they're his best friends.
I think it's Saturnine, I want to say, that says something similar. They talk about how the Perpetuals all mostly, it seems, worked with the Emperor for thousands of years. And over time, and almost like one by one, they all realized the true extent of his ambition. And I think one of the things that's really interesting about this is, I think, slight misapprehension people have with the Emperor is people think that, like, how does anybody ever get confused by this? If they all kind of had the same goal, unite in order to fight the future threats that would assail humanity, what changed their mind? What they all realize over time is that the Emperor will force this. He will force all, and we see this in the Horus Heresy right at the start, where the Interrex, a civilization that works with Xenos, and they get quashed, and they're a perfectly valid civilization of their own. And so they all kind of abandon the Emperor over time. And the Primarchs are described in that book as something like, his artificial perpetuals. And of course, Vulcan is technically actually a perpetual, but the rest of them are still functionally immortal. And so it is literally because, like, it's suggested that because all the perpetuals abandon him, he makes Primarchs, and someone would assume Custodians as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing with Custodes. They are also functionally immortal. They do age over time slowly.
Yeah.
And that's where you get the concept of the eyes of the Emperor. They get to the point where they're like, oh, I'm not quite as good as I used to be. I'm not up to protecting the Emperor. I'm going to become a spy in the galaxy.
Yeah.
That's kind of their thing. But the interesting thing about the Custodes is when they are within the physical presence of the Emperor, even now when he's on the Golden Throne, they don't age. And so, like, that's a really interesting thing of like, well, what is the relationship, or how selfish is that relationship between the Custodes and the Emperor if they don't age when they're physically around him?
Yeah.
Which I thought was fascinating.
One thing I would love to see explored more in as a similar thing to that. So Constantin Valdor, when he leaves Terra for the final time, he says, only in death is like his final words, of course. And he talks about how the Emperor's voice is no longer in his head. And there's this idea that it's gone. And that was really interesting to me with him on the Golden Throne. And when I first read that, I was like, oh, is that because he's like concentrating now? But now in modern 40k, we have Goblight talks about this idea of the Emperor has awakened. And I wonder if in the Custodians' heads they can hear the Emperor again when they're near him. Because I think that would be a really interesting idea.
It's funny you should say that. That comes up in one of the books. I think it's Watchers of the Throne. But there's this whole big thing that the Custodes don't dream. Like, that's just not a thing for them. It's just not how they're built. And so when they do have dreams, they are essentially like prophecies or messages sent by the Emperor. And so the main character in that novel has a dream, and everyone's just like, "You what? You did what?" And he explains it, and it becomes this like central plot point. And so that communication between the Emperor and the Custodes is super important. But also more than that, like they do this cute thing, the Custodes. They know the Emperor so well that they finish his sentences for him sometimes when he's talking to people.
I always hate it when couples do that. That's so frustrating.
But it's funny because there's a bit where there's like 4 custodians in the Emperor, and like the Emperor starts talking, and then every so often a different custodian will come in and finish the sentence he's saying. And then like a different custodian will start, and then the Emperor will start. It's like 4 people having the same custodian. The same conversation.
Yeah.
Like at a character. I thought it was fascinating. Especially because like later in the 40k lore, there's this whole big thing with the Custodes, because obviously none of them in 40k have had a physical conversation with the Emperor.
Can I ask, is that confirmed?
Oh, God.
Is that confirmed that all of the custodians alive today, because I don't remember this anywhere, were created after the Horus Heresy? Because like you say, within presence of the Emperor, they are functionally immortal.
The 300 companions that are the ones who are physically right next to him in the throne room. So the thing is with the companions is that they are called to become companions. It's like this feeling they get that they should like be there. It doesn't really matter their rank or what they're doing. They can be doing like this radically different job. They could be part of the Solar Watch or the Shadow Keepers, and they can feel this calling, and they'll go to the throne room, or they'll be taken to the throne room. In terms of were any of them alive to actually have a chat with the Emperor, it's a big organization. I'm pretty sure that there would be no like custodians who've like actually in the order who've spoken to the Emperor unless they were a dreadnought.
I might be wrong, and maybe there is something I haven't read, but I think things like that are not addressed, and I think these are always like deliberate decisions by Black Library, because if in a future book they go, oh, by the way, this is the last custodian who has spoken to the Emperor, that's an option for them narratively. And there's always things like this in the lore, and it's one of the things about doing the YouTube channel that's quite funny is people often ask questions, like that kind of question, or what happened when these 2 Primarchs met? What was their relationship like? Something like that. And I'm always like, I don't know. It's not written. There's not to say it doesn't exist, and they don't have an idea of it in their mind, but like there's just not everything is covered. Like another one is like when the Emperor met certain Primarchs for the first time, there's actually not a huge, there's obviously some of them that are very famous, Corvus we have, the Lion we have, Kurz we have, but for a lot of them we just don't have that lore. It just doesn't exist. It's got a brief overview in like a 5th edition codex, and that's what we go by.
Yeah, that's actually a really interesting point that has kind of like brought that up to me. The first time Korax meets the Emperor, there's a really interesting moment, because there's this whole big deal about how the Emperor looks to people.
Sure.
The Emperor looks like you personally expect him to look.
I think he wears emerald armor for the Lion or something like that. There's a weird line.
Yeah. Like it's something, because like basically the Lion expects him to be wearing like green armor.
Yeah,
so he sees him wearing green armor.
Yeah.
And it's the same thing with Korax. Korax, as far as I'm aware, is the only person who's ever seen through it, and it was only momentarily. There's a bit where it describes the Emperor stepping down off his ship, and he's just a normal-looking guy wearing a toga, essentially. He's got, like, shoulder-length brown hair, medium height, medium build, looks average-looking, brown eyes, like, sort of my kind of complexion. And then all of a sudden...
Are you the Emperor?
It's like he says, like... well, yeah. Well, I'm not one to brag. But
there you are.
There's the thing, he's sort of, like... Korax then sort of like snaps and like reality changes, and he sees the Emperor as this larger than life golden figure in gold armor stepping down off the ship like some sort of ancient conqueror. And so like that's the figure everyone expects to see of the Emperor. And so there's a line in some of the books with the Custodes, which is fascinating to me. And they say the Emperor lies.
Yeah.
Even to them. And so, like, it's this fascinating thing that his closest advisors and stuff, but he still lies to them.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things in Watchers of the Throne, I think it comes up in that Regent Shadow series, and then I think it comes up in, I want to say Warhawk as well, but somewhere in the Siege of Terra, where there's this interesting, there's these interesting debates that go on amongst the custodians in terms of how much has the Emperor planned for, and it kind of feeds into that idea of does he lie? Because there are some custodians that obviously don't believe he's a god, but they do believe he is so powerful and he has this foresight that actually maybe he's planned for everything. Maybe he planned to be on the Golden Throne, and this is all part of his plan. And so they have a lot of faith in that plan. But then there are some that believe that actually they need to try and forge their own kind of destiny going forward. And there's these internal debates that go on in the novels, and they're kind of touched upon. And kind of if you think about, we'll probably talk about Valdor in a bit. Like what happens with Valdor, it kind of all plays into that.
Yeah, it's fascinating because, like I was saying earlier, the Custodes invent a branch of philosophy for themselves that is only concerned with the intention of what the Emperor said, because they have a lot of his recorded words, but understanding what someone said and what they meant are two different things. And so after 10,000 years, they've developed branches of philosophy so that they can try and understand his intentions, because they don't specifically know. And I just find that fascinating. Like, the idea as well that the Custodes and the Emperor are supposed to work as this sort of indivisible unit. Like, they are extensions of each other almost, or like at least the Custodes are absolutely an extension of the Emperor. And that's why their bond is so special, because they're best bros for life.
Yeah, absolutely.
But that's like the whole thing. And so they do explore in the 40k narrative, like, what would it be like if, your best bro for life wasn't there? How would you react? Like, what would you do?
Yeah.
And so they do feel not necessarily lost, but they do feel like a part of them is missing, and they feel the loss.
Yeah, I think one of the things that is, I don't know if it's ever described as such, or whether I'm just kind of interpreting this from the writing. The way they're written is so interesting, because obviously they are, people naturally like to compare things to, like, how do they compare to Primarchs and that kind of thing. And I would actually say there's a really cool bit in one of the Dawn of Fire books. There's a simulation that they've run to try and kill Guilliman. And they literally, they figure out, like, if they get the element of surprise and then there's, like, enough of them, they think they could do it. Anyway, it's quite cool. Custodians are quite inconsistently written across many books because, like, as I say, naturally you want to compare things to Primarchs, and there are times when you get characters like Constantin Valdor. I think the quote from Master of Mankind is to say that he has blade work that is actually better than any of the Primarchs, but he's just not as physically strong. He's just not built the same way, to put it as Twitter might. But certainly they make it very clear that he has more combat experience by like a millennia or so than any of them. But then there are other times when, and Valdor's an exception, but like the Custodians seem to get walked over quite easily, and it's an interesting one. When it comes to a character, like I have this with the Lion and the Dark Angels, I think I don't like ignore other books, but I think that these books are the true essence of who they are. And I think they describe them the best. And I think that kind of happens with Custodes. So yeah, how do you feel about the writing of Custodians at times?
So the bit that I know you're referring to is in the War of the Beasts novel series. There's a bit where it's just so badly written. There's a bit where a whole bunch of Harlequins run into the Imperial Palace. Like, literally they run into the Imperial Palace, which is the size of, like, Denmark. And they're running through, literally sprinting through all the defenses, killing like 50 guardsmen at a time. And one or two of them get to the throne room, Like they get to the door outside the Eternity Gate, the door outside the throne room, and it's just so stupid because this Harlequin is basically like, "Don't kill me! I need to talk to the Emperor," and you're just like, "This was your plan? Like, what? Why would this work?" And she's just casually killing custodians as if that's a thing that will happen. Like, it just blows my mind.
Yeah.
They even try and play it off because they're like, "Oh, these Harlequins are the best Harlequins ever, and like they're the top tier of all combat fighters in the Eldari race." It's like they'd still die against a custodian.
Yeah.
Because like normal Eldari person in a funny holosuit versus genetically engineered super being at the pinnacle of all human technology that's ever been created. Like that doesn't work.
It is funny.
Sorry, I'm very passionate about this.
No, I get you. I get you. I mean, to be honest, I will say, for you Xenos fans, it's quite nice to have an Eldar win like that. I think, like conversely, I remember quite a controversial point. There's a bit in Godblight where I don't know why they did this. They talk about how an Eldar Farseer is so much less powerful than a Space Marine librarian. And it's such an unnecessary line. And it's just like, why would you say that? Why wouldn't you give the Eldar Anyway. But yeah, no, I get what you mean. Yeah. It's very interesting. But then, Watchers of the Throne, I can't remember. It's like two custodians and some Sisters of Silence. They holding off hordes by themselves. Yeah. It's a phenomenal scene,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. Like, that's what Custodes can do. Like, the absolute essence of what Custodes are is in that series of novels. That is like the definitive like guide to Custodes. Because I think the thing that a lot of writers, I think especially, don't, and just people in general, don't understand about the Custodes is that they're weird. Like, I think they're just weird people. So like I think the thing that people sort of think about when they look at super beings essentially is they're like, oh, they must be better at everything. They must be the pinnacle of everything it means to be human. And Custodes kind of aren't that for a reason. Custodes, and it talks about this a lot, especially Valdor talks about this in his sort of like Primarch novel. He talks about how there are emotions he can't feel. There are things he doesn't understand.
I know what you mean, yeah.
Yeah, it's not just like, oh, they're the best at everything. It's they're the best at certain things that make them good at their job. Like, they're really good at art, philosophy, culture, like all that kind of stuff. Because...
Bit in the Siege of Terra where, like, I think Dawn goes in to consult Valdor and he asks, like, where Jagatai Khan is, and he talks about how he's going to go right off and just kill people because that's what Jagatai gets to do if Jagatai wants to do. And Valdor says something like, you lucky bastard. Like,
yeah, no, it's true. But I mean, like, there's another bit where Valdor specifically talks about he has someone poke fun at him because the guy he's fighting is a Thunder Warrior. And the Thunder Warrior is just like, yeah, in his novel. And the Thunder Warrior is just like, you're not even enjoying this fight. Like, what's wrong with you?
Yeah.
Like, you can't enjoy this. You're not even a person. Because, like, you can't feel the joy of battle. Like, you can't feel joy in the same way normal people can. And so, yeah, they give up a lot to be Custodes.
Yeah.
There are parts of their humanity that are just missing because they're not... Because, and it shows the ruthlessness of the Emperor, those parts of their humanity weren't useful for the Emperor to have in his, like, friends. So they don't have them.
Yeah.
So, like, yeah, people forget that the Custodes aren't just amazing humans. They're weird.
They are weird. Yeah, I think another really interesting little tidbit that I think is really nice to remember is how people often like to say this about Space Marines, where the chance of seeing a Space Marine in the galaxy is actually very low. In 40k, we just play those 1 in a million battles in theory, but it's even more so with the Custodians. There's a series called the Vaults of Terror series, which is really underexplored series, I think, on the internet. And Inquisitor Crowl at the start, the first book, when he meets Navradaran, he an Inquisitor was like, I didn't think these guys were actually real. Like he was told they exist, but like you never saw them. So even an Inquisitor on Terra was like, I had no idea these guys were actually real, which was a fascinating little insight. And that's another great. It's not exactly a custodian series, but they feature in it quite a bit.
That is actually a fantastic series, which I highly recommend people read. And it seems like, agreed. Not many people do, but it's got some really pivotal stuff in it.
Really pivotal, yeah.
The big issue is that the Golden Throne is broken. That sort of like raises an interesting point for me. Like, one thing that I think is really interesting about the Custodes that sets them apart from everyone else in the Imperium is that they do not give a shit about the Imperium.
Yeah. I get what you mean.
The only reason they care about the Imperium at all is because the Imperium is the thing protecting the actual person of the Emperor. That's the only reason they care. So if they're like out in the Imperium doing stuff, they're like, I'm doing this because this will protect the physical body of the Emperor in some way. And so it's a much more interesting perspective, I think, that like no one really shares with them.
No, I get what you mean. It's a really interesting idea. I'm going to use that as a segue to Constantin Valdor before we finish up, just because you can't really talk about Custodes and not talk about him, because he is this hero of heroes, and he is, you know me as a long-time Dark Angels fan, and I recently got the Lion, which is such a ridiculous idea that the Lion is in 40k. It's something that like reading that book, it's like it felt like I was reading fanfic from Dark Angels fans, because the stuff they talk about in it is so out there. The idea of the Lion working with the Fallen, and the idea of the Lion maturing and actually being like, you know, and just, you know, working for humanity and all this kind of thing. The Lion meeting Dante, what the fuck is that? Like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. It just, like, my heart was just in my chest the entire time. And, I mean, it's mostly there, to be fair. But, incredible idea that these things happen. But the idea of Valdor being alive and present in the setting has now been around for quite a long time.
The ultimate fate of Constantin Valdor, the original Captain General of the Legio Custodes, and one of the most trusted confidants of the Emperor of Mankind, was revealed in the book Bequin Penitent. Allegedly, he is the King in Yellow, a revered and feared figure, a sovereign of the clandestine realm, the City of Dust, a foe to the Inquisitors Gregor Eisenhorn and Gideon Ravener. The King in Yellow shrouds his visage and intentions, and he has made enemies both within and outside the Imperium. Servants of the Inquisition, the Cognitae, Eldari Craftworlds, even the Chaos Space Marine legions work to overthrow this mysterious figure. But to almost all of them, his true identity remains hidden. It is said that a singular ambition courses through his veins, a relentless pursuit to grasp the true name of the Emperor, to wield dominion over the very architects of the Imperium's fate. His unyielding quest propels him across the cosmos, from the spectral shores of the planet of the Sorcerers to the shadowed heart of Sikaris, planet of the Wordbearers. And he even seeks the tomes of the Black Library itself. Eisenhorn and Ravener seek to oppose him, but now they learn that they are truly outmatched. The King in Yellow marshals an army unlike anything seen before. Scores of psychic gnolls, warp entities, enhanced and mutated space marines, cognitae agents, perhaps even echoes of his own custodian brothers. Nevertheless, the mystery appears to be over, as Beta Bequin has revealed the true name of the King in Yellow, Constantin Valdor.
How do you feel about this storyline of Constantin Valdor in the Bequin trilogy?
I think it is absolutely fascinating. Because the thing is, number one, we don't know if it is Valdor or if it's someone pretending to be Valdor, for one.
This is a good point. and I think it has to be addressed. I don't see in any way that it can't be Valdor, because I read 9 books, essentially, including Magos, and in the penultimate book, the final chapter, they go, like, after this quest they've gone on to find the name of this character who's underpinned huge events throughout the trilogy, they reveal his name is Constantin Valdor. I do not believe in my heart of hearts that Dan Abnett is a bad enough writer to then in the next book go, lol, nope, it was actually Lorgar. I just don't buy it. I think that would be terrible writing. What is the fucking point in that? It's a very common thing that people think, but this is the thing. I've never seen Constantin Valdor in the room and him saying, I am the king in yellow. But given how the narrative, given how books work, I just don't believe Dan Abnett could ever take away that the Yellow King is Constantin Valdor. Because 9 books. 9 books to this point. I just don't buy it. But
I agree.
Yeah.
But the issue then is suddenly, what's he doing?
I mean,
because
it's a hell of a question.
That's the entire issue.
Yeah, it's gonna require some strong explanation.
Because the entire, there's a lot of theories out there about what Valdor is doing. One theory is he was off with Leman Russ and they were trying to find the Tree of Life to heal the Emperor.
Yes.
We have since found out that the Golden Throne is broken. And the relationship between the Golden Throne and the Emperor is different to how we thought it was. Dan Abnett, in an interview, said it's not the Golden Throne that keeps the Emperor alive. It's the Emperor that keeps the Golden Throne alive. Yeah. And so that, number one, is a fascinating revelation because it changes everything we know about the relationship with the Emperor and the rest of the universe. And then it's the case of okay, so if Valdor and Russ are out in the galaxy searching for something to help the Emperor, are they trying to fix the Golden Throne? Is that what they've been trying to do?
That would be a good sign, yeah.
Yeah.
Why does he need a shit ton of blood angels, grails, blanks to do this? But okay, yeah. That's not a bad idea.
Yeah, exactly. That's the thing. Why does he need the resources that he's gathered?
To explain why he has done what he's done is going to take... Yeah, I think parts of it...
A while.
Yeah. Parts of it, I think, might get explained away under this idea of he was... Because there's this idea in the book, the Beckwin Penitent, the second one. I think it's Penitent. I can't remember. There's this idea that he has kind of taken over the Cognite. He originally presented himself somehow as someone they could work with, and then he grew in power until eventually he was more powerful than all of them, to the degree that certain Cognite agents, who are the Dark Mirror to the Inquisition, try to actually kill him because he's this powerful now. And he is actually said to be, I think there is a quote that says he is the most powerful person in the Imperium. This is before Gilliman comes back, we should say. But the most powerful person in the Imperium, more powerful than the High Lords of Terra. So it's that nuts. Raising an army is always an interesting one. I am surprised, because one of the things, every time, I don't know if you had this, but because of what Dan Abnett has done, in theory, allegedly, for the character of Constantin Valdor, every time he writes about Valdor in The End and the Death, I analyze that line twice. I read it and read it again, looking for any kind of clues. And that book does have a bunch of things that link to the Beckwin trilogy. And I just unravel it because Annuncia's in it, the Custodians and Valdor. Valdor has a really interesting end to that book. The last we see of Valdor is him stabbing the fleshy vengeful spirit, and that's now in the warp. It's essentially kind of described as being in hell itself. So what that's going to do to his mind, I don't know. Anyway, blah blah blah. But so I was trying to figure out. One of the things that happens in that book is Sanguinius is this really sweet moment where Sanguinius is I just wanted to say, you're my brother, And like, Valdor's like, hey, it's not now, not now. And he's like, yeah, but it's now. Like, I just wanted to say, like, it's a really sweet moment. And that's paraphrasing quite terribly, but read the book. But like, it's a lovely moment.
Mm-hmm.
And now we find out what Valdor has essentially done to his sons. Because like we do meet I can't remember his name now, one of the Blood Angels who's gone through this kind of mutation, got actual wings and everything, and his mind, he's like lost in the red thirst and all this kind of thing. It's like the idea that Valdor would do that to Sanguinius' sons is savage. Like,
well, we don't know what he's done to Sanguinius' sons. That's the thing, because like the Blood Angels have the thirst. That is a thing that exists.
Don't have wings though, do they?
Fault. No, they don't. So what? That's the thing. Why do they?
I have no idea. Like, it's so wild.
Like, what is that about?
Someone told me that apparently Dan Abnett had to get permission to write the storyline for Beckwin that he's written.
Yeah.
And even he was surprised when they said yes.
That came up in an interview I saw with him once, and I was just like, wow, I'm not surprised you had to ask permission for this, because this is crazy.
Really crazy. Yeah. We don't talk about it nearly enough.
Yeah.
Like, it's so nuts.
We really don't. But like, I get what you mean when it talks about like sprinkling in like Easter eggs about Valdor, because they do talk a lot about his character growth in The End and the Death, because like in his Primarch novels, they talk very specifically about how he can't not do what the Emperor tells him to. Like it's not built into him, and not built into the Custodes in general. Actually, they have to do what the Emperor says, even when they disagree. And it's kind of a bit of weird like contention within all of them, because like it does talk about how sometimes they're like, is this the right thing to do? But because the Emperor has told them like, do this, they're like, well, I guess I gotta do it.
Yeah.
And so like they don't really have free will in the same way normal humans do.
Totally get what you mean. Yeah.
And they know that. Yeah, exactly. That's kind of one of the tragedies of them. But yeah, Valdor, it specifically says in The End and the Death, his character growth is that he starts thinking for himself.
There's like a secret plot that Valdor is a part of and kind of heads. And Malcador actually get to see what he thinks. And he thinks that like, he's like, oh, that's interesting. He's, we've known about this for a while. And if Malcador knows about it, it's assumed the Emperor knows about it. But they let it happen because they think it's a good thing that now Valdor is thinking for himself. The other actual plot point on his Primarch novel that we should mention is there is this bit in the book where it talks about how the Emperor had a vision of Valdor and knew that one day Valdor would be of tremendous importance, and that manifests in, I think it said he sends like an entire army to go and reclaim this one child. And we know Valdor well, I say we know. It's said Valdor has actual parents, and they obviously are very dead now. And that came out again. All this stuff kind of feeds together. That came out, I think, a year after Beckwin Penitent came out. There's a lot of series that are now on hold, I should say, because of obviously people are focused on the Siege of Terra, which is very much, it seems, a collaborative work from many authors. But the whole King in Yellow storyline is so. Yeah, it's going to take a hell of an explanation. The other thing, my other theory, and I talked about this in a video, where I wonder if it is going to be something that is connected to the Dark King, because there's a bit where they talk about the Dark King where they say the Dark King is a prophesized god. The prophecy comes from before humankind existed. So I don't believe it refers solely to the Siege of Terra, and I suspect we'll see some attempt at an apotheosis in the final Siege of Terra book. And I wonder if, for Valdor to do these, terrible things, then I wonder if it's because he's literally trying to defeat a chaos god on his own. That's his own goal. One of the things I find fascinating about the idea of Valdor being the King in Yellow is that, because a lot of people go, your natural assumption would be someone like Alfarius. Alfarius is the King in Yellow. But you mentioned earlier in the podcast how there's this idea of the eyes of the Emperor amongst the Custodians. And the eyes of the Emperor are the Custodians, like you say, who have like kind of aged ever so they've noticed themselves get like a tiny bit slower, and they're like, you know what, I don't trust myself. I'll go and make a band of spy network. But the thing is, that actually makes sense for Valdor being the king in yellow then, because Valdor is the ultimate custodian. He is described to be a bit bigger and a bit better fighter, and like I think there's a nod in his novel, the idea being that because he was the first one created, the Emperor kind of threw in a bit more resources into him, and so that's why he's this kind of bigger, stronger character than the other custodians. But if he's this ultimate custodian, he would surely be the ultimate eye of the Emperor. And the custodians create spies and networks, and they can take down, even eyes of the Emperor, they can take down civilized, planetary governments on their own. If Valdor is an eye of the Emperor now, essentially, the idea that he has got this little, section of the warp and this pocket dimension and all this kind of stuff going on, it kind of works for me. I think that works quite well. So I feel like that actually does match his character. It's just, why is he kidnapping so many people?
Yeah. It just goes back to him having this character development of, okay, he started to think for himself. He's got all of this wealth of experience and knowledge and now resources. What has he decided he wants to do to deploy all of this? Because the Custodes don't give a shit about the Imperium at all.
Yeah.
They care about the Imperium only insofar as it protects the actual Emperor himself. So, will we end up with a situation where, to save the Emperor, Valdor knows he has to do horrible things in the Imperium? Because he'll do it.
Yeah, I should say that's why he doesn't. Valdor is quite vocal about his, belief that the Primarchs were not a good decision.
Mistake.
Yeah, mistake. And he doesn't really shy away from, telling Malcador and I assume the Emperor, like, I told you so. I'm not going to lie, guys. I did. I definitely said this at the time. And I will say as well, one of the things that's really fascinating about Valdor and kind of the concept of him returning is in the Great Crusade, they're described as a triumvirate. It is Malcador, the Emperor, and Valdor all together. So, that's the level of power we'd be talking about coming back to the 40k. And it's with 40k storylines, obviously, that there's a lot of the time, especially when it comes to Primarchs returning. Like when Guilliman returned, a lot of things didn't surprise me. Like how Guilliman reacted to religion in 40k was basically exactly what we thought. We all went, everyone went like, I imagine he'll not like it, but then accept it because it would be too hard to remove. And that happened. But I got to hand it to Dan Abnett. I got nothing. The final Beckman novel, I have no idea how that storyline is going to end.
I also have no idea. Because, there's so many things in that book. You're just like, wait, what? For example, the bit where they've got that band of random Astartes from the Heresy. Yeah. And they're just like, our bond was forged at Isfahan. It's like, hang on a minute.
Do you hate
some
each
of
other?
the legions you guys are from weren't... Yeah, and some of the legions you guys are from weren't even at Isfahan. So what were you doing there? It's just bizarre.
Complete, yeah. No, I totally get what you mean. It's complete madness. And you know what is so funny as well is because Eisenhorn, I would probably guess, is the most recommended book for where to start with 40k, to the degree that when it comes to talking about Henry Cavill's new Amazon show, it's probably the most gone to series where people think he should start. And the reason for that is because it's a very good story, very well written, but it's also relatively small scale. We talk about, there's bits in Ravenna where they're essentially chasing down a mass murderer. It's like, is that worth an Inquisitor's time? What are we talking about? But it's generally small scale. And then we go from that to Beckwin. And Beckwin starts off with I'm a clone of a dead character. And you're like, okay, how's that happened? And then she's they've improved upon the idea of being a blank or a pariah. And it's like, okay. And they go from that and that and that. And then Valdor. And then it's like, oh, okay. So the idea that goes from small scale to this galactic threat is incredible. This is it's so wild. I have a theory that the reason Henry Cavill wanted to do a Games Workshop show is because we know he's a custodian player, and so what he did was he got a job as a superhero and became an actor, and so he could then pitch this show to Amazon so that he could then make them do Eisenhorn, so then he could do Ravner, so then he could do Beckwin, so then he knows Games Workshop will probably make models connected to characters in the show. And so he's done all of this purely because he wants a Constantin Valdor model. And I gotta say, fair play, Henry. I gotta hand it to you.
Yeah, I mean, he's said before in interviews, like, if I was going to play anyone, it would have to be either a Primarch or Valdor, and probably Valdor.
Yeah.
Because, like, that's the thing, as an actor, he can only play one character in the universe. Of course it's going to be Valdor.
That's cool things there then. Thank you so much for coming on, man. Obviously, yeah, you're mainly active on Instagram nowadays, but you do have a YouTube channel with like painting tutorials and all that kind of thing. Anything else you want me to link in the comments below?
YouTube and Instagram are the main two ones I use, mainly Instagram. Yeah, if you ever need any painting advice, please let me know. Yeah,
I will say you are somebody, you're always happy people to reach out to you on Instagram. So I will say generally people in the Warhammer community are, which is one of the things that makes it so great. But so, yeah, if you have got any questions on how to get 3 Golden Demon finalist pins, do message Cripster. So, yeah, thank you so much for coming on, man. Yeah, I always knew you'd be a great person to talk about. And, like, what the things we've talked about are insane. They're so insane. Yeah, thank you so much. And thank you so much for watching this. And I'll see you next time.